Before we go too much farther into making a character, especially one of a particular genre, steampunk, perhaps we should have a closer look at what steampunk actually means. There is a lot of uh, there's a lot of silliness regarding the definition of steampunk. Some of it is on the side of um, it's very narrow and has only to do with this or that particular social conventions or whatever. Um, this is too narrow to even bother with. Fortunately, it is mostly ignored um, because no one can make any use of it. The other side of things is the exact opposite, where anything is steampunk because I said so. And this is obviously nonsense. If a word has no meaning, it has no meaning, and therefore is not even usable. You'll find a lot of discussion on whether if you stick gears on something, does that suddenly make it steampunk? No, it doesn't. If I take a middle Italian Renaissance costume and applique or stitch on some printed gears to the hat or waistcoat or something, then it doesn't suddenly make it steampunk. It means it's a middle Italian Renaissance costume with gears on it. Steampunk actually means something. And while there is a lot of variety available, perhaps we should look at what it means before trying to expand past it. As Marcel Marceau said, we learn the rules so that we can forget about them. Many musicians have echoed this. For example, until you actually understand what something is, it's not safe for you to make variations on it. Not safe in the idea of you'll look like a complete idiot, and nobody wants to do that. So let's consider what it is. Yes, I know it's really noisy out here today. I'm not sure what's going on. I've had before, since I started, 2 trains, 2 different kinds of airplanes, and an awful lot of cars. So hopefully you'll bear with me as I whack through this ridiculous amount of noise going on. This looks like a nice, calm outdoor area, doesn't it? I was wrong. Anyway, alright, let me tell you a little story. Once upon a time, way back in 1980, there was a story called Cyberpunk. And it very quickly, as a word, got applied to a whole little genre of near-future dystopian fiction, high-tech and low-life, as people describe it, or if you like, sort of a near-future film noir kind of feel. And it became a very popular word very quickly. In 1987, the first novel that many people would consider steampunk was written, although there's a lot of discussion on this one, what started it all. But Infernal Devices, a book by K.W. Jeter. I may be pronouncing his name wrong, and if so, I apologize. I've never actually heard it said out loud before. I'll continue pronouncing it Jeter or something along those lines. Correct me, please, if I'm mistaken. I know you will. In 1987, he wrote a book, Infernal Devices, which is a lot of fun, and I highly recommend. And before that, he wrote a sequel to The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. 1979, he wrote this, called Morlock Nights. And that plays into a letter that Jeter wrote to Locus magazine in 1987, which you'll notice is the same year that Infernal Devices was published. He and his friends, authors Blaylock and Tim Powers, had been writing this sort of alternative history kind of stuff for a while, and some discussion was had on it. This is what he wrote to Locus magazine. Dear Locus, Enclosed is a copy of my 1979 novel, Morlock Night. I'd appreciate your being so good as to route it to Farren Miller, as it's a prime piece of evidence in the great debate as to who in the Powers Blaylock Jader fantasy triumvirate was writing in the gonzo historical manner first. Though, of course, I did find her review in the March Locust to be quite flattering. Her review of Infernal Devices, I believe. Personally, I think Victorian fantasies are going to be the next big thing, as long as we can come up with a fitting collective for Powers, Blaylock, and myself. Something based on the appropriate technology of that era, like steampunks, perhaps. Now, first of all, obviously, he was right. Steampunk has become a very, very big thing, and very popular, and there's really good reasons for this that perhaps we'll discuss another time. Sorry, that's sort of a spontaneous visitor, which might return. So what we have here is a genre based on the gonzo historical, as he put it, style, in which people take a historical era, specifically Victorian in this case, and apply differences to it. What we end up with is a genre that says, what if technologies were more advanced at that time? Not different technologies, there shall be no electronics here, but what if they were more advanced? What if, as in Infernal Devices, there were the possibility of having clockwork automatons, robots we would call them, because it's easier to pronounce, that had gears that were ridiculously fine and complex, and as he said in there, chains that were as fine as a hair. Now, this is ridiculously impractical even today, but if electronics hadn't come along and some other technologies, it's not inconceivable that we could have had something exactly like that today, because of the push to make things ever better, more convenient, more durable, smaller, cheaper. It's simply the drive of a technology and of a free market. Well, this alternative history could have been like that, or it could have been that without the advent of things like electronics, we end up with a technology 100 years later that is advanced in that sort of way. Or as a third option, perhaps it is quite normally, Victorian era Europe, or for that matter any place else. People have very intelligently moved it on to some other locations as well. Asia, Africa, the Americas, very famously in Wild Wild West. The assumption is that things are, for the most part, in some of these, is that Victorian London is Victorian London with all the trappings and all the normalcy. However, there are these mad scientist types who have expanded things. I know, I've got another airplane. Who have expanded things in their own mad scientist ways, taking the technology of the time, or certain other things, radio being a fairly recent concept. There's a lot of ideas of transmitting energy or signals or whatever through some invisible means. The aether is very popular as a concept in steampunk things for this reason. So, what do we have? How does this all sum up? What we end up with is Victorian era science fiction along the lines of H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, of course. And what that means is you take the look and feel of the times, and then you give it improbable levels of adventure and technological prowess, if not advancement. And that is steampunk. That is steampunk. It's pretty easy to work with it once you understand these things. If you start adding too much to it, you wander into fantasy. And while admittedly in Victorian times fantasy and science fiction were almost indistinguishable from each other, they, certainly from our point of view, have a distinction. You want something plausibly scientific, plausibly rational. If you decide that you are, the great-granddaughter of the fairy queen, it's not really going to fit in a steampunk costume concept, or character for that matter. If, on the other hand, there are ways to work that kind of thing into it, make no mistake, but you're going to have to do it very carefully so that you don't just pop right out of the genre and mess with people's ability to know what to do with your character, or to understand or enjoy it. Or don't call it steampunk. Call it fantasy with a Victorian flair. There's nothing wrong with that either. It's just a different genre.